this chapter, we're going to talk about a new feature for theming in Drupal 7. This is dynamic theme function names. It's similar to the dynamic template files that we talked about in the basic theming series, where we could create a node template file like node-article.tpl.php, and that would only be used when theming article nodes. For some of the theme functions in Drupal, you can do the same thing, where instead of using, say, theme_field, we have the option to use a more targeted version of the theme function to target just specific fields. We're going to use this to clean up this tags element on our node articles. For reference, let's take a look at our mockup so we know what we're trying to make this look like. And so what we're going for is this right here, where all of our tags are listed in line with a comma in between them, and then each tag is linked to that tags page where you can see all of the articles tagged with that particular term. So that's what we're going to try to accomplish. The first thing that we'll do is figure out where this markup is actually coming from. The easiest way to do that is going to be to use the Theme Developer tool. We can go ahead and turn that on. Because the Theme Developer tool adds a lot of additional markup to the page and does a bunch of crazy stuff in order to allow us to do this sort of Firebug-like highlighting, I usually turn it off when I'm not using it. And we'll see that once we turn it on here, it does some different things to the page. You see, for example, the label here for our field tags is actually white with a black background now, whereas before it was gray with a white background. And I think that's just the Theme Developer tool kind of mucking with things on the page. But it still allows us to get the information we need, where we can turn it on and then select the element on the page to figure out what template or theme function is generating that element. So I'm going to select this tags field here. And then I can see that the function that's being used to create this HTML output is theme_field. And then it has a bunch of candidate function names. Possible names that I could name this function, theme_field, that it would use instead of the default theme field if one of these existed. If we read the documentation for this by clicking on the function name, going to api.drupal.org, and then finding that function here, we can get a better idea of how this works. So every field that's output, the tag field, the body field, the image field, any fields that are on our nodes, are themed by default using this theme_field function. And it generates the HTML for them. And then you can use this dynamic theme function name system in order to create more targeted theme functions if you wanted to only theme a specific field. Or maybe you only want to theme a specific field in the context of a particular content type. Theme_field is the default. I could also name it something like theme_field__body. Body here being a field name, or article here being a content type name. What this would do is say, anytime that a field is being output on a node of the article content type, use this specific theme function to generate the HTML. Or you might want to say, anytime a body field, so the field with the name body is being output, regardless of whether it's on an article node, a page node, an event node, whatever the case may be, use this theme function to output the HTML for that field. Or you might want to get really specific and say, the body field on an article node should use this function. Again, similar to how the dynamic template names worked for the tpl.php files. You can also see listed in the documentation here, you can do a similar thing with a file named field.tpl.php. This is sort of a unique thing in theming with Drupal, where by default, all of the field output uses this theme_field function. There is a field.tpl.php file inside of the field module in Drupal core. That file, however, is just a reference. So if you wanted to say, create a template file for a specific field, you could use that, start from that, copy and paste that, and make your own template file, but it's not actually used by Drupal core. The reason that it uses the theme function instead of a template file is that theme functions are slightly faster. Once the file that includes this function is loaded by PHP, that file never needs to be loaded again, and you can just call that function as many times as you need to. This template file would have to be loaded once for every time a field is displayed on the page, so you might start to incur a bit of disk I/O problems where it has to read this file a number of different times, especially if your node has a lot of different fields on it, and that can slow things down a bit. Now that we know where this is coming from, and we've got this idea of, okay, I can name this function in a specific way to target specific fields. Let's take a look at how we'd actually do that in our theme. As per usual, when overriding a theme function, I usually just start by copying and pasting what's already there in the documentation. So I'll just copy this theme underscore field function, and we're going to paste it into our theme's template.php. I'm going to go ahead and paste this into the template.php file for our 960 robots theme. And then, as always, when overriding a theme function, I'm going to change the name here. I'm going to remove the word theme and replace it with the name of my theme, so 960 robots. If I switch back to our site real quick, I can take a look at this output again from the Devel Themer tool, where it showed us the candidate function names for this theme field function. So right now, it's using the function theme field to create that output. Once we empty the cache, it'll start using our 960 robots version of theme field. But what I'd like to do is actually target just this specific field. I don't want to alter the output for every other field, just this tags field. So I'm going to use this candidate function names here to figure out what I could name it. I want to alter the tags field and any instance where it occurs. Right now it's just on our article nodes, but if we were to ever use it anywhere else, I'd want it to look the same there. So I'm going to use this field name here, theme underscore field underscore underscore field tags being the name of our field. So now that I know that information, let's switch back to our theme and edit this template.php file and just add underscore underscore field tags to our function name. Now, when Drupal goes to output the tags field, what it's going to do is first check and see, does this 960 robots field underscore underscore field tags function exist? And if it does, it'll go ahead and use this function to generate the output for that field. If that exists, it'll fall back and use the function named 960 robots underscore field. And if that doesn't exist, it'll finally fall back to the default theme underscore field function and use that to generate the HTML for that field. So now this is working. Just to make sure, I'm going to print out this variables array inside of our function so we can see what's inside of it. I'll use KPR from the Devel module so we can get a nice pretty output. I'll say KPR variables. Switch back. I'm going to close this window. I need to empty the cache. Once again, the Devel Themer module kind of messing with our toolbar a little bit, but we do need to empty the cache so that it finds our new theme function and starts using that. And clear all caches. Once that's done, I refresh the page. I should see that KPR output for each time of tags field is printed on the page. Yeah, great. You can see it being output here. So that's telling me our theme function is getting called, and we can see what's inside of that variables array. If I tip open this output here, I can start to see what's in it and what I have to work with when I'm going to theme the field output. This variables array contains inside of it a key named items. And inside of items is each of the different tags that are used on this node. So this particular node has two tags, one of them here and the second one here. So two elements inside of this items array representing our tags. Each of these is a renderable element. So in previous chapters, we've talked about renderable arrays and how they can be used. So that's what we're seeing here. Each one of these elements is a renderable array. We can just use the render function in order to print these out. So I know here that I've got each of my tags, and I have that information. What I'd like to do is use that in order to take our tag output, displayed below here, and display it as a list of links in line, instead of as it is right now, where it's a bunch of individual divs. So we can take a look at our template.php file again. And inside of the template.php file, I'm just going to remove all of what's in here currently. All of this is the default markup that's used to theme a field, and I'm just going to get rid of it, and we're going to use our own markup in this case. The first thing that we'll need to do is iterate over that list of items and get those into a format that we can use. I've got some code to do that here. This code creates a new variable named links, which is an array, and then it uses a for each statement to loop over each of the items inside of this variables items array, and it's giving us the delta for each item. So a field that has multiple values, like our tags field, the delta represents which position or which delta that value is. So the first one would be the delta 0, the second tag would be a delta of 1, and so forth. And then item is going to be our actual item, that little chunk of renderable array that we saw when we looked at the KPR output. As I loop over each of those, I'm simply going to use the Drupal render function on the item, so this renderable array element, which will take that renderable array. In this case, it's a link, and it'll output that link's HTML and assign it to a key inside of this links array. So now I have an array that contains all the HTML for each of the tags. Once I've got that, I can take that and use PHP's implode function to take the array of links and separate them into a single string with commas in between each link. So I'll do that by saying output implode links. So the implode function takes two arguments, one of them being the thing that you would like to place in between each of the elements inside of this array. So our array has two links in it. What it'll do is place a comma and a space in between each one, and then concatenate all of that into a long string and assign that to this output variable, which I'll then just return at the end here. I can say save, switch back over to our site, and click refresh. So now it's going to use the new version of our theme function. And look at that. It's still doing the KPR output here, but then it's outputting each of our links tags as a link with a comma and a space in between them. I can inspect the source on this, so I can inspect that element. And we'll see, as expected, that element is a link. It has a little extra information around it because of the Devel Themer module being enabled, so this span here. But then you can see there's the space and the comma, and then the next tag being printed out. So that's what our function did there. There's one more thing I'd like to do with these tags before we can call this complete. If we take a look at the output of this variables array again, and get a little more into it and inspect each of the individual items, so I'll inspect this first one, the item with the delta of 0, you'll see that this item has some options, pound options here. And under pound options, this is where we can add additional attributes to the item. If we keep drilling down and use this, I can see that this is where the RDF module is adding its additional attributes to output on the page. So okay, making use of that information, in addition to that, inside of this variables array, there's an element here called item attributes array. If I take a look at that, it's got one entry for each of the tags, so this delta again, and it has an additional rel attribute. What I want to do is make sure that these attributes that are applied here that would normally have been put out by the theme_field function in the div that wrapped our tag output, I want to make sure that these attributes get applied to our output. So I can do that by simply making a couple more changes inside of our theme function. I'm going to switch back over to the code. And inside of this for each loop here, what I'm going to do is make sure that the attributes that are inside of that item attributes array, so that rel attribute, gets moved over and put onto each individual link item, so that when Drupal render is called on that link item, it outputs those additional rel attributes as well. So I can use a snippet of code like this, where I'm just moving the item attributes with the delta of whichever item I'm on over to the actual link that I'm about to render out to the page. And also point out right here, this plus equals operator is a shortcut for the array merge function. In PHP, what this will do is say, if item options attributes here is an array already, go ahead and merge this array with the existing array. So that's what plus equals is doing here. I'm also going to remove this KPR because we don't need that anymore. And I'll save. And if I switch back and take a look at our site again, and click refresh, you'll see that the KPR has been removed. And if I inspect one of these individual link elements here, you can see that that rel attribute that was previously applied to the div that wrapped all of the tags is now applied to this link element. So for RDF, it knows that this content here, this tag, is of the type DC:subject. So that's an example of using dynamic theme functions in order to override a specific field on our node output. These dynamic theme functions are used in a couple of places. The most obvious one is for outputting fields. Anytime a field is output on the screen, it uses the theme_field function by default. But in order to give themers a lot of control, Drupal allows you to use these candidate function names in order to be more specific about which field you're theming and in which context. Just as a refresher, we can turn on the Devel Themer module again and take a look at the theme functions here for our field. I'll hop back up to the field element. You can see now it's telling us it's using that one that we created inside of our template.php file, but it's also showing us all the candidate function names. We could have used any of these to theme this field output in a more specific context. The other place that this is commonly used in Drupal 7 is for the function theme_links. Theme links is responsible for putting things like this contextual links item on each page. So you might want to be able to theme what this contextual links item looks like on a maybe per node type basis. So you could do a dynamic theme function name in order to target this set of links on only article nodes. This system of dynamic theme function names, which is new to Drupal 7, gives us a couple of nice advantages. It gives us the advantage of having dynamic function names like we had for template files in Drupal 6, and we also have for template files in Drupal 7, where I can do things like say, I'd like to override the output for this field in this case, but only in a specific context. Like I'd only like to override the output if it's a tags field, or I'd only like to override the output if it's a body field on an article node. In addition to that, by having it be functions instead of templates, we also gain the performance increase of not having to call those template files every single time a page is being output. So that's why in this case, it uses the theme functions by default. Everything's run through theme_field by default. But in order to allow themes to really change how things are output and really modify how their content looks for individual fields, it gives us this ability to say things like the tags field on a specific article, or all fields on a page, and so forth. I think that this is a really powerful system with some really nice advantages.